Liam McCollum, really one of the brightest young minds in the liberty movement, one of our rising stars.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Liam McCollum Show, a podcast by Human Reaction, where I interview leading voices on hot button issues to arm you with the truth and advance liberty. Today, I'm interviewing Scott Horton. He is the director of the Libertarian Institute and editorial director of antiwar.com. He has hosted over 5,500 interviews on foreign policy on the Scott Horton Show and is the author of Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, both of which I've interviewed him about on previous episodes. Today, I'm interviewing him about his upcoming book, Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. We dive deep, and I hope you enjoy it. Here's Scott. All right, well, welcome to my first official podcast with the Human Reaction Podcast. I'm officially in partnership with them, and I'm very grateful to those guys, and I'm very excited to continue to work with them and continue to appear on their podcast. But for those who haven't been watching my personal show, the Liam McCollum Show, you might not know that Scott Horton was actually my first guest and one of the most regular guests on my podcast when I was doing it regularly. And it's kind of a funny story. I was in my undergrad here at the University of Montana, and I was in the journalism department, and some people were encouraging me to start a podcast. And I emailed Scott with the question of, hey, if I started a podcast, would you come on? And he's like, yeah, shoot me a time. So basically I was kind of forced to put together something within like a matter of 2 weeks. And it's really what spurred me to start this thing. So I figured since I'm now officially starting this podcast with the Human Reaction Show, I'd have Scott on as the first guest. And I'm very happy to have you here.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here with you, Liam.
Well, you sent me your new book, Provoked. It's not out yet, but you sent me an advance copy, and I've been reading through it, and it is phenomenal. Do you have another one of your books next to it to compare the size?
Yeah.
I'll grab one.
So here's my first book, Fool's Errand, and here's Provoked. So it's 7x10 instead of 6x9, and as you can see, it's quite a bit.
And
it won't be quite this big because we're going to take all the URLs out of the footnotes, and there's more than 7,000 citations, which is not all of them have URLs, but we'll be taking out approximately 6,000 something URLs. So that's going to shrink it down by about 40 more pages, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say when you were preparing this, I called you a couple times and you were concerned about the length of the thing, and just rest assured to Uncle Bob, if you're looking at the size of the thing and it's going to prevent you from buying it, 7,000 citations, you said, like most of it, I think are footnotes. Like sometimes there's a page where half of the page is just footnotes. And I was reading through this thing. I mean, sometimes I'd come across a quote and I'd be like, surely that can't be a direct quote from them. And then turns out it's just like from a State Department cable or something like that. So it's really well researched. It's like almost every other sentence has a footnote, and I'm really excited for everyone to actually order this. I think it's going to be huge.
Cool. I hope you're right. I admit that it's a built-in flaw that is inescapable to me on this project. I didn't know what to do, that it just ended up being so massive that it's funny. Actually, I went back to poach a couple sentences from a very early draft, and it actually began. This short book is an attempt to explain, like, this is supposed to come out in 22 and be this little primer. And then, of course, I got carried away, man. And, in the previous books, Liam, I'm in a real hurry to get you through up to September 11th so we can start the rest of the story, right? So chapter 1 of Fool's Errand and Enough Already are both Carter through Clinton. Everything that happened from Carter through Clinton in just chapter 1. That way, when we get to September 11th, we spend the rest of the book doing war by war by war, or the rest of Afghanistan in the case of Fool's Errand. In this one, I couldn't do that. Where it's like, oh, chapter 1 is everything that happened in the lead up to the war, and then here's the war. Because the thing of it is, the things that happened way earlier in the story, like during H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and W. Bush and Obama. That all had so much to do with what happened in the war in 2022 that they each need their full treatment. I mean, I could have done a much more summary version and been done sooner, but I figured, well, whatever. I got carried away, man. And so I proved my case beyond a doubt. And I hope I did. I think, I hope it's readable. I know that it's judge a book by its cover. It's massive. And that's a turnoff. It's a turnoff to me too. There are gigantic books on my shelf that I have not quite got to yet. And the giganticer, the harder to get to. Like, I totally understand that. Now I considered maybe putting it out in volumes. So it's like, he's going to read a bunch of volumes, like what each president did to piss off the Russians or whatever. Like, it's not going to make sense to do it that way. As a collection or something. So, it is what it is. I've tried to trim the fat as much as possible, but yes, like every time that they tried and failed to overthrow the government of Belarus is in there, right? Like everything is in there.
Yeah. I mean, and I told you that it was really hard for me to put it down since you gave it to me, and I'm in law school.
I'm very happy to hear that.
I have law readings I have to do, but it was really hard to put it down for those. But when do you stop? At what time in the timeline do you stop? Is it like
this
current?
Week. Yes.
Okay. So you're still adding to it.
Constantly updating it so that when it comes out, there are a few places where it says, as we go to press, the attempted color revolution in Georgia doesn't seem to quite be pulling, like that. What can I do? You know what I mean? They're in the middle of a attempted color revolution in Georgia right now. So like, yeah, that's in there, man. Everything's in there.
Well, I just hope that you don't have to release a second edition and change the title to say How the West Provoked World War III. So I hope you get this out soon so it makes an impact. But I do want to dive into this. You alluded to the amount of times that you kind of beat the reader over the head with these quotes and prove the points. And that was really the main theme that I got, especially in the first two chapters with Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton. I couldn't believe how many times they had directly promised to the Russians that they wouldn't move east after German reunification. And I also couldn't believe how many times people in the administrations directly engage with the idea of whether their policies would provoke the Russians. Because, right. I invited you to the University of Montana here, and we hosted you and you got to talk to students here. But something we would also do is we would go out on the campus here and we would try to talk with students and see where they stood on the war. And if you brought up the idea that this war was provoked in any way, it was just immediately thrown out. Like, it was discarded. It was treated as a conspiracy theory. And the current president of the United States, one of the lead talking points has been this war is unprovoked. That's been the main narrative. But the idea that they were engaging with this very idea in the 90s was just the most infuriating thing to me. So I guess take that wherever you want.
Sure. Well, I mean, throughout the book, you find Republicans, Democrats, and National Security Council wonks and State Department goofballs and whoever of all descriptions using the word provoke or provoked and saying, oh no, we provoked a war. Oh no, we better not provoke them. I bet it'll provoke them if we do this and that. I did not just go and put the word provoked and Russia in quotes and just Google times that people said that or what, you know what I mean? That's not how that came about. That's purely just organic from doing the research all the way through this timeline and reading these sources where this is the subject matter. If they phrased it another way, it'd be just fine. But it just so happens, honestly, that all throughout the book, they say, well, geez, if we do this, it might deter them. But if we do that, it might provoke them, et cetera, et cetera. And as you say, all the way through from George H.W. Bush through Bill Clinton and, all the way through. And I think he said especially through chapter 1 and 2, because that's all you've read so far, right? Because
yeah,
the W. Bush chapter is also very well documented.
Yeah, but I mean, especially, I think what was so baffling to me was just that, like, specifically Baker talking about their promises not to expand east.
Okay, so you want to explain that?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a controversy about it too, okay? Like the simple version is America promised not to expand the NATO alliance east into Eastern Europe toward Russia and include the former Warsaw Pact states and Soviet republics after the end of the Cold War and after the Soviets agreed to allow German reunification and agreed to withdraw their troops from Germany. And the thing of it is, the overly simplified version of that is a little bit false, but only a little bit. And the Warhawks seize on that and go, oh, come on, see, you exaggerate. And then, they always do that, right? They want to take the simple thing and say they found some nuance so you can discard the rest of the discussion. So the nuance is that the specific promise that came out of James Baker's mouth on February the 9th, 1990, was we promised not to move our forces east inside Germany, into East Germany. And that was the specific promise that Gorbachev, based on that promise, allowed reunification. It was him and Douglas Hurd and Genscher. Hurd was the British foreign minister and Genscher was the German foreign minister. And they all gave these assurances, and it was on the basis of those assurances that Gorbachev agreed to allow reunification. And then what happened was it got all complicated because kind of doesn't make sense to say it wasn't even a matter of forces. It was a matter of just expanding NATO into Eastern Germany. And that didn't really make sense. How are you going to allow reunification, but only the western part of the country is in the alliance or something? So they said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll amend that a little bit and we'll just promise not to move our military forces into the East. And you guys will settle for that. So he says, okay. And that was the deal that they eventually signed. But at the same time that all this is going on, first of all, as you say, there are multiple promises and assurances, not just from Baker on the 9th, but from Gates and from who was then the deputy director of the CIA, directly to the KGB chief, as well as the other foreign ministers, especially the German foreign minister Genscher and the British foreign minister Hurd, made all these promises to Gorbachev. And essentially what happened was, in the larger context, they were promising that NATO is going to become a political organization. And for security purposes, we're going to create a new common European home with you. And it won't be an alliance, but it'll be a partnership that will include the former Soviet states as well as Russia. And we'll all work together, and that will replace NATO. So the question of NATO expansion into Poland, well, actually did come up there. Sorry, because I should not get too carried away. In numerous occasions, it was brought, no, we're not going to bring Poland and Hungary in. No, we're not going to go to the countries east of Europe. Hey, if we can't expand east into Eastern Germany, that means obviously we're not going to expand to countries east of Germany either. They did say those things. But as far as like actual making handshake deals on it, that was not the handshake. The handshake was on a more specific statement, I guess. But it's all in the context of saying that this is all irrelevant anyway. When they say the purpose of NATO, or one of the great things about NATO, is to be a member, you have to have civilian control of your military, and you have to have no ongoing border disputes with your neighbors and all of these things. And that has helped to normalize peace. In fact, they cite specific circumstances where Eastern European countries held conferences, settled borders once and for all so they could join NATO in the 90s. And these kinds of things made post-World War II and post-Cold War borders permanent. They broke apart Czechoslovakia and then, made that a permanent national border there. And then in settling these things, that was like the political purpose of NATO, that they sold the Soviets, that's all NATO is going to be now. And then, of course, as you can tell, they're promising not to move military forces into Eastern Germany. Well, that promise would be moot if it did not at all imply, as the Hawks say now, that it's perfectly fine then for them to allow Poland and the Baltic states into NATO and move our military forces there. If it's perfectly acceptable for us to put a military base in Estonia, then who cares if we move them into Eastern Germany, right? So the context of the whole thing was that this is not going to be a problem. And George H.W. Bush promised from the very beginning of this thing, we are not going to take advantage. I'm not going to tap dance on the Berlin Wall, literally or figuratively. And we're not going to rub this thing in your face. And then the real point is that they were lying. And they knew all along that the plan was to expand NATO and to expand American dominance in Europe all the way to Russia's border eventually. Although I don't think Bush and Baker ever imagined bringing Ukraine in. But they did, the Baltics were a separate issue and they're on the far side of Poland. So already you're talking major expansion in mind from the H.W. Bush years. And I had thought that it was really Bill Clinton that did it, but it was H.W. Bush who knew what he was doing. He was jerking their chain, promising them one thing while making plans for another. And so then when Bill Clinton came in, he was his own president and they reassessed the policy and they decided to pick up right where H.W. Bush left off and work toward NATO expansion as being essentially inevitable. And then the history of the Clinton administration on that issue is a history of him, on one hand, lying to Boris Yeltsin, Gorbachev's successor and the president of the Russian Federation after the Soviet Union fell, lying to him and also placating him and attempting to get him to accept what we're doing. Look, we promised not to do it in 1995. We know you have an election in 96. We'll wait until then. We'll help you rig the election and then we'll do it after that. And all of these things. So, and again, the Clinton government in 1993 essentially blatantly lied to Yeltsin. Warren Christopher did, and said, again, the same lie, that we're going to create this partnership for peace, and it's going to be the new security arrangement, and it's going to make NATO moot. And so you don't have to worry about that. And then it was just a few months later that he said, nah, actually, it's all about expanding NATO, and we were just jerking your chain. And Yeltsin freaked out and started screaming at him at the Budapest summit in 1994, the same one where Ukraine promised to give up the Soviet nukes that had been left behind in their country, and all that at that same conference. Yeltsin had a big blow up and yelled at Bill Clinton for lying to his face, or sending Warren Christopher to lie to his face. And so anyway, so that's the whole thing of it, right? It was essentially, look, let me go back. You're quite a bit younger than me. I don't know what they teach you in school about this anymore, like in high school or whatever anymore, Liam, but it used to be the common narrative, not any kind of revisionist libertarian take, but like the government school take, was that World War II happened because America, this is the way they spin it. You can see why they invoke this, right? It serves its purpose in the myth. America did not join the League of Nations and come to dominate Europe after World War I. And by not doing that, that is what allowed Britain and France to be so heavy-handed against the Germans in the Versailles Treaty and in the way that they carried it out, implementing it and all the rest of that. And what they did was they bankrupted and humiliated the Germans so badly by stripping them of their territories and all the reparations payments and everything, that it allowed for the rise of the Nazi Party in the spirit of revenge for what had been done to them and all of that kind of thing. And this is what led to World War II. So then the lesson of Versailles is America can never come home again. And the lesson of Versailles is that America must be dominant there. So that's like the foundational myth of World War II. In a way, it's part of it. That's why they teach that part of it, right? But then part of it too is that America, of course, is much wiser and more benevolent in the form, especially of the Democrats, like Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, that we know what to do. And rather than beat down and humiliate our vanquished enemy, as the French and the British did after we helped them do it, Woodrow Wilson helped them do it in World War I. After World War II, we rebuilt Germany and Japan and made friends out of them. And so we did not set them on the path for revenge and another war against them in 20 years, but we made friends out of them. And of course, to turn them against the USSR. So we switched our war from being allied with the USSR against Germany and Japan to being allied with Germany and Japan against the USSR in the blink of an eye, for your George Orwell fans out there. And so, but the point of it is, there's a lot of points in there, but the point I'm trying to pick out for you is the one about how when you win a world war, You're not supposed to beat your enemy down in humiliation so badly that you get a negative reaction from it, the way that it was a failure of Versailles. And so the Bush senior government and the Bill Clinton government, they all invoked this lesson. They all said, now the lesson of Versailles is you got to be really nice and you got to befriend them and you got to do the right thing. But then they didn't do that, Liam. They didn't. They did treat them just like the Germans. They did strip them of their territories, although not really. It was their territories that broke away. But I'm just saying, in the analogy, man, did they lose a lot of territory. And now here America's integrating their former not just allies, but Soviet republics, these kind of phony puppet states right on their border under the Soviet Union, and going that far. And well, in the Clinton years, not quite that far, but determined to go that far. They did Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic under Bill Clinton. But during W. Bush in 2004, he went right for the Baltics and more. And they saw that coming. That was clearly, on its way. And so, and then on top of that was the economic shock therapy of the 1990s as well, which, forget all conspiracies, okay? Like, just to boil it all the way down, they sent American neoliberal advisors from Harvard to help them make the changeover from communism. And due to bad American advice and bad corruption on the part of the Americans as well as their Russian wards, they blew it, man. They ruined the Russian economy in the transformation from communism to capitalism. And they put them through absolute hell. And, part of it was just oil prices in the 90s were just in the tank. It was $10 a barrel, $20 a barrel or something. So that was a huge thing. I mean, they're an energy exporter. Without that, what the hell are they going to do? But then on top of that was just massive corruption and just the wholesale deindustrialization of Soviet and Russian society. And just put them through absolute, Hades to get to the other side.
And you really quick, Scott, you have a really good episode with Bob Murphy on this that I highly recommend everyone should listen to, because you actually go through what Murray Rothbard and other libertarians had recommended at the time.
And that's all in the book too.
Yeah. I really recommend that everyone checks it out. But and
wait, let me just to wrap that one thought up, it was so bad that so many Russians believed that it was on purpose. So, like, regardless of whether it was or not, just for argument's sake and time's sake here about who was playing what role in this, the point is, at the end, the Russians felt just like the Germans felt after, a decade after World War I, that they had been taken advantage of and backstabbed and betrayed and beaten down and humiliated. And that this was, as many predicted, was going to lead to the rise of a new nationalist right. And I think, for all of the spin about how Vladimir Putin is Hitler, we're really lucky he's not. It really could have been a much more right-wing reactionary force that had come to power in reaction to all this. And instead, we got essentially a center-right national security state Republican, which is like, man, that could be way, way worse, but it's still, ever since he took over that country, almost immediately he declared independence from America and said, he wanted to suck up to us and work with us and be best friends with Bush if he possibly could. But he was not just going to let Russia be a completely owned sock puppet state like it had been under Boris Yeltsin.
Well, and then you say
a huge part of the problem from the American point of view.
Yeah. And then you say in your book that after the Kosovo War and after Bosnia, before them, actually, Russian support for the United States was around 50%. Like there was opportunity for at least the liberals in Russia to cozy up with America. But after those two wars, I think it fell, what was it, like 16%, I think you say in your book?
Yeah. And especially after the Balkan Wars, it was just in the tank. But especially by the end of Kosovo, it was just forget it. We'll see how you guys are.
I think the case you make throughout this book is that it really did not have to be this way. And there were many opportunities for us to, offer them into NATO or actually pursue the Partnership for Peace. But as you say, all of it was deceptive and all of it was directed at this eventual goal of bringing in Eastern Europe. So I'm wondering if you can actually unpack exactly what is motivating these people. Like like, what were the policy goals? Is it ideological? Like you talk about, is it Brzezinski and his books throughout, and you quote these people in saying that they're trying to, it's almost as if they're trying to build up NATO to prevent a future nationalistic Russia. But in doing so, there's this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy whereby they actually exactly bring about a nationalistic government where,
right. And they see it coming and they go, well, if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and we fulfill our own prophecy, at least we have NATO.
Right.
It's just like, man, okay, guys, just dig a grave and jump in it. Why not? I don't know what the hell they're doing, but yes, that's right.
So do you think that is it ideological? Is it monetary? Is it they just have bad ideas, or were they eventually preparing for, or are they eventually preparing for taking on Russia because they can't stand having a right-wing nationalistic government that controls that big of a landmass in Europe? Is it like, what is the goal?
Look, at the end of the day, everybody knows they got H-bombs and we can't really fight them. So then everything else is like sort of this, in frustration. What else can we do then? As far as, the motivations, it's always a mix, right? It's a conspiracy of interests. Incentives mean a lot. But there's, of course, an extremely powerful ideology of American empire. A mix of different ones, right? I mean, Yankees are busybodies. Southerners like to fight. And, the Israelis need militarist America to remain on call forever. You have the arms manufacturers and, the huge lobby. And this is, I think I do a pretty good job of documenting this in the book about how at the end of the Cold War, they were in a panic. What are we going to do now? We have to have something to do. And this goes for the arms manufacturers just as well as for the NATO bureaucrats themselves. I'm like, oh no, we're going to have to get a job. We don't want to do that. So we'll have to come up with something else. And this is, in my Bosnia chapter, you'll see where, so many of the NATO-crats said, we have to find something to do out of area or out of business. That was what they would always say. And so, Bosnia was like a make work project for them to establish and to perpetuate American dominance in Europe. They need us for some reason. Otherwise, the Germans would be the dominant power on the continent, not us. The purpose of NATO is to keep the Soviets out or the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. I said that in the wrong order, but so Lord Ishay said, the Americans in, the Germans down, and the Soviets out. That's what he said. So that's what it is. It's America's military alliance. And just like all American government programs, right? It's its own self-justification. It's its own bureaucracy and its own, reason for being. And the thing is, and I try to make the point in the book that, this is not just a libertarian take, right? I show where, all kinds of different liberals and conservatives said, and including senators and whoever, including neocons like Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Well, he wasn't exactly a neocon, but extremely close to their sect. Said like, okay, well, we can end the Cold War. Now the Cold War's over. We can end the empire and bring the troops home and just mind our own business and cash our peace dividend and be a normal country in a normal time and all these things. And that was what everybody thought was going to happen. I mean, knew exactly what it was going to look like. But if you just ask the American people if we're going to dominate the rest of the world forever, they would have said, why? The Soviet Union is gone. And we made friends with the Chinese 20 years before that. So what the hell? 15. So, what's the problem? And then, of course, the problem is any change in the status quo is an emergency. And so that's why, Liam, it's always the right thing for you and I to rule the world, because as they always put it, I just saw this. I didn't even see it. I just read Taibbi mentioned it. Taibbi did a debate about the empire with a couple of kooks. And what do they say? If it wasn't us, it'd be somebody else. And they'd be worse, dude. Now, he debated Bret Stephens from the New York Times. Man, if I debated Bret Stephens from the New York Times, I would just show up and read Bret Stephens quotes. And then that would be my whole thing. But That's what they really think, right? Is that if it wasn't us, it'd be somebody worse. And the thing is, that's stupid, right? The Germans can't afford to rule the world, nor can the Russians, nor can the Chinese. Well, the Chinese are looking at Bill Clinton and W. Bush and Barack Obama, and they're going, yeah, that's what we want to do. Blow our brains out, destroy our country, commit national suicide like a bunch of goddamn Democrats. Why would they do that? They have no need to do that. They could dominate their neighborhood, but so what? It's their neighborhood. Guess what? America's not in East Asia. Ever heard of that? We're not in Eastern Europe either. It's actually called America for a reason. It's a whole separate continent over here. And whatever, they always say it's the difference between the rules-based world order of the rule of law versus going back to the 19th century of great power politics. But American domination of the planet under this pretended rule of law is not great power politics, expanding our military alliances right up to Russia's border. When the Russians say they're surrounding us, what does that mean? Look at a map. Look at Ukraine. Right? Russia's western border is not a straight line. Kharkiv is 300 miles south of Moscow. When they say surrounded, that's what they're talking about. That's what we're trying to do to them. They're now revamping air bases in the South Pacific on old islands from World War II. Old airstrips from World War II are now getting new pavement, preparing for nuclear war with China. Over what? Over whether they have sovereignty over their own damn island or not? Like, you gotta be kidding me. Oh no, the whole world would go mad if we weren't there keeping it sane, except that we're the ones threatening global nuclear holocaust over nothing, over who controls Dnipropetrovsk in eastern Ukraine, which you don't care about. I know you don't, and no one listening to this does care if the Donbass is under Russian sovereignty, as it had always been for 300 years, or not. Right? You don't care, and nor should you, and nor should the United States of America threaten the survival of at least northern human civilization over the issue. It's crazy. And by the way, why do they always say the rules-based world order instead of, say, for example, the UN Charter, which I'm not the greatest fan of. If you've ever read it, it's pretty commie. But the deal is that the UN Charter is actually the treaty that everybody ratified. The UN Charter is the thing that these nations agreed to participate in. What's the rules-based liberal international order? That just means the edicts of the president and his National Security Council, period. That's all that means. It means the will of the American empire and their will to power, constrained by no law whatsoever, you might have noticed. They assassinate American citizens, torture men to death, tell lies all day, every day to justify their every sin. Where we all know and no one cares that ever since Obama came to save the day in 2011, they reopened the chattel slave markets in Libya. That's the American empire. Spreading slavery back into North Africa, where the commies had kept it out since World War II. Well, not that Gaddafi didn't have his own sort of slavery, but his military dictatorship is a far cry from the chattel slavery that's taking place there now. And that's the true legacy of the American empire. There's nothing rules-based about it at all. Like Biden could even read and understand a law and abide by it. That's the role of the president, is to break laws. I mean, how about the fact that the last time we declared war was against Romania in 1942? Does anybody listen to this have a problem with that? That we've done nothing but fight wars and lose them this whole time. The only victories you can point to are Grenada and Panama. You say that Iraq War I was a victory. I say we've been fighting against Iraq for 33 years. We're still bombing them right now.
So you mentioned Biden here, and I really do think that your book is somewhat of an indictment on all of Biden's legacy. I mean, this book really is about Biden's legacy in some ways. I actually did a control F to see how many times Biden came up, and he comes up frequently outside of his own chapter. And you had mentioned these Democrats that were talking about how NATO needed to search for a war to justify its existence. And Biden is quoted in that section, in that paragraph, essentially saying that NATO needs to find a war or else, they'll have to go away. And the one that I'm thinking of that is the most damning is in the Clinton chapter. Someone, I forget who, but someone had brought to his attention that if we expand NATO, Putin, or not Putin, but Russia in general, just might cozy up with China. And he essentially mocks them and says, oh, well, they could try Iran. And later in the Bush chapter, Putin threatens essentially doing exactly that. He threatens that he's going to go cozy up with China. And I think the quote is, I quite like Chinese food. And recently we've seen the BRICS meetings. I think there was one just earlier last month where China and Russia are, cozying up at least economically. And now we're seeing North Korea join in the war in Ukraine. So I'm wondering if you can comment on just the trajectory of this war and also just like Biden's legacy and how he has been wrong on the thing since the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that a great snapshot of the whole story right there? You got this absolute idiot, this self-important blowhard idiot, Joe Biden, this whole time acting like he knows what the hell, right? He's not a senator who's just up there passing laws for credit card companies, making it illegal for you to declare bankruptcy over credit card debt on their behalf because he's the senator from Delaware. But he's also the whole time extremely interested in public policy and extremely convinced of his own genius. And as you say, you quote him there talking about, oh, yeah, right, you're going to turn east. You're going to make a deal with China instead of us, please. And I think if I'm not sure if you're referring to a different thing or not, but the Chinese food quote that I have in the book is he's actually explaining to his interviewer, pardon me, he's saying to his interviewer, hey, look, I like eating with chopsticks. It's fun and everything, but come on. This is a European civilization. We are a Western Christian civilization. We're part of Europe. We have to be. And of course, we'll always be. We can't be, Eurasian or, Asian civilization. Like, in other words, yeah, it's Russia, but emphasis on the your part of Eurasia there. They're part of Christendom. They're the eastern frontier of it, but they're white and they're the West, right? Sort of, not the West, but the easternmost part of it or some kind of thing. That's what he's saying. He's saying we don't eat with chopsticks. That's their civilization. It's different than ours. We're part of the same civilization as Europe. And it must be our policy and our destiny. And there's another quote of Biden there saying, congratulating Putin, or not even to him, but just describing him as being the most pro-European and pro-Western Russian leader in centuries. He wants nothing but to be part of Europe with us, is what he said about him back then, and which was true. And the thing is, they just refuse to compromise with him in any way. The way that they see it, and I have quote after quote after quote after quote of these people saying, yeah, but look, I mean, the Soviet Union is gone. Russia's nothing but a pipsqueak, third-rate country now. We're supposed to treat them with respect. We're supposed to take the time out of our busy day to pretend like we care about their opinions or concerns whatsoever. Oh, God, please. And that's the way they all do. Remember, I don't have this quote in the book because I guess it didn't come up in context. Maybe I should remind myself exactly what the context was and find a place to shoehorn it in there. It was John McCain described Russia as nothing but a gas station with nukes, right? Somebody called them. I guess I should have these quotes in there. Maybe I did and cut them for some reason long ago. I think I did have this quote of something where it's like, they're just like a gas station on the upper Volga or something like that, or the upper Volga with nukes, something where they just do nothing but absolutely diminish the importance of Russia and what they think about everything. And of course, to the Russians, like, what is that other than just their abject humiliation and rubbing their nose in their failure and the Cold War and all of those things, right? Like, what does it cost you to be nice to, like, I don't know, your girlfriend's shitty little brother that you don't really like? Whatever. You know what I mean? Like, why can't you just pretend to respect them then? What does it cost you to pretend to respect them? Like, what are you going to have to really do for them other than just not treat them with such blatant disregard, you know? And, you know, that was basically it. And you have, you know, people like Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense, William Perry, makes that same criticism of the rest of his peers, that was the attitude. Was what are they going to do about it? Nothing. So we can do whatever we want, whatever, you know what I mean? So I have the quotes of the people saying that, and I have the quotes of their peers criticizing them for saying it too. And like, this is, you know, so there's a little bit of Ron Paul throughout the book because he's my guy, and I'm a Ron Paul guy. I'm a libertarian, but the book is, I hope, not for libertarians or even necessarily people on the right, but it should be for everyone. I got citations from, you know, whatever, all over the place. And I am certainly nonpartisan in my criticism of, you know, American actors here. If you have a favorite president, yes, I completely destroy him for you, but I do the same to all of his peers from both parties. So I'm not pulling punches or pulling favor there.
Well, and
Donald
I think
Trump's the only one that I actually really defend in any way, only because of all of the false accusations against him on the Russia front.
Yeah.
But they're not really defenses of him as much as they are just accusations against Brennan and Comey for framing him for treason.
Well, and I think you really do a good job of using their own officials against them. So like the Clinton administration, for example, you have a line in there that really stood out where there was, I believe it was the Secretary of Defense and all of the generals were making the case that maybe they should actually admit Russia into NATO before they expand eastward. But then the diplomats walk into the room and said, no, the president has made his decision. And I think you're right. The diplomats out-hawked the generals. And I'm wondering if you can like unpack that. Why is that? Why is it that people like Bill Clinton, who graduated from Yale, like, why is it that him and Hillary Clinton are so hawkish, even against the advice of their own generals? Like, what is this about them that makes them so obsessive over foreign policy? I mean, at one point you say that part of it was domestic considerations, like they were trying to win over, you know, some votes here. But at a certain point, like when Hillary Clinton is so obsessed over, you know, fighting a war or funding an insurgency on Russia's border, it makes you wonder, like, what are the actual motivations for these liberals in particular?
Yeah. Well, look, on the complete idiot basis, you see this going on right now with Kamala Harris, right? And this is the same for all Democrats. And then it's even worse for the women, that they have to be to the right of Genghis Khan in order to prove what weak, feminine communists they're not, right? And so look at me and my muscular foreign policy. That's what they all say. Look at how muscular I am. I have a big, fat jelly roll Robert Kagan with me. And he says that I'm a tough guy. And that's what Hillary Clinton did in 2016. Tried to flip purple states blue by bringing Robert Kagan with her to say, see, the chief neocon says I'm just as bloodthirsty a killer as anyone. You could totally see on like an absolute junior high school civics level why this makes sense in their head, right? Some Republicans really, really, really love war and are turned off by Donald Trump's hippie peacenikism. And so what we'll do is we'll appeal to them and get their crossover votes. Those are the swing votes we need, right? Without ever recognizing that, look, man, this is the only thing that people like about liberals is that supposedly because they're women and because they're not conservatives, that they might be more peaceful. They might not seek war as the first answer. That's supposed to be what they're running on, is that they're not hawks. And that's still the reason that people vote for them a lot of times, because the Republicans are all a bunch of John Boltons up there. And so, like, we need a woman who can be compassionate and come up with a peaceful resolution. You hear people say that, right? But the Democrats don't hear that. The Democrats only hear, oh no, we look weak. We have to act tough. And so they just double and triple down on every little thing. And in the Bill Clinton years, Newt Gingrich came in with the Republican Revolution, a massive landslide in the midterms of 1994 in reaction to Hillary Clintonism, basically, in the first 2 years of Bill Clinton. And I like to think it was partially because of the Waco massacre as well, and that the Democrats just got their asses absolutely handed to them. And Gingrich came in with a contract on America, the contract for America. And it was funny because I don't remember all the particulars now, Liam, but I bet you if you pulled it up, you'd be like, oh yeah, 1 through 5 are great. And then you'd be like, whoa, 6 through 10 are like, what? And like, it's that kind of thing. The Republicans are, they're just terrible, dude. And so one of them was NATO expansion. And that Bill Clinton, he's a wimp. He's a wuss. He's not man enough. He's a draft dodger. He's too pinko to be man enough and patriotic enough to expand NATO into former Russian territories. Huh? But that's the frame. And the Republicans were beating the crap out of him on it I'm not exactly sure when they really started the narrative, but they were certainly pushing it in 96. Why is Bill Clinton dragging his feet on expanding NATO? It's just an entire party run by Lindsey Graham's. There's no America first in Newt Gingrich. It's so funny seeing being a Trumper now and go, yeah, we got to be protectionist to bring those jobs home. He was the forefront of this third wave crap that said we got to ship every job overseas and teach everyone to code because that's the wave of the future because the Tofflers said so. It's the third wave theory, everyone. That's all you need to know is one good congressman figured out what the entire future's supposed to look like. And he's decided what we're going to do. Thanks a lot, Newt Gingrich. And anyway, I hate that guy. Anyway, so that was a huge part of the politics, right? It's the same thing going on with Kamala Harris right now. Hippie punching Donald Trump and looking like a big tough guy, touring around with Elizabeth Cheney. And saying, see, right-wing war hawks, you can trust me. And now, I'm very curious. Aren't you curious? I know that this hurt Hillary in 2016. No Republicans voting for Hillary Clinton because she's bloodthirsty enough. Republicans hate Hillary Clinton, dude. They hate her almost as much as I do, probably. Right? It's just built in, dude. She's just vile. She's just the worst person in the world. We all hate her as much as she hates us, at least. Maybe more than that. And she absolutely wants to see us all burn to death, right? So F her, dude. There's no way they're going to cross the aisle for her. The Kagans might, but Republican voters out in Arizona? No, come on. And I wonder, but at the same time, progressives saw her palling around with the hawks and stayed home. Leftists who had been anti-war the whole century long were like, what? Now I'm supposed to like you because of how much like W. Bush you are? That you're going to have the Kagans in your cabinet and all of this? No, which of course, Newland was Hillary's spokesman at state in the first Obama term. And so they stayed home. That was possibly her margin of defeat. Well, she thought it'd be smart to be a hawk, but it was dumb. And so, but now I'm really curious. Harris is doing the same thing, running with the Cheneys, not just saying, oh, thank you for your endorsement, but like bringing Elizabeth Cheney with her to events. Like, what is that saying to the liberals and the left? Or do they care about war at all anymore? Did they not remember the name Cheney being attached to the CIA torture people to death program? Or what are we talking about here? The guys who lied us into war? And look, man, everybody just tell your Siri, man, tell your Chat GPT, hey, is it true what Scott Horton says that you can read even in the New York Times where Elizabeth Cheney was grooming the Muslim Brotherhood to take over Syria in the W. Bush years when she worked at the State Department? Is that not true just because she changed her name from Elizabeth to Liz? Because Elizabeth Cheney was trying to groom the Muslim Brotherhood to take over Syria when she worked at the State Department in the W. Bush years. How come nobody ever crucifies her for that? Because they don't know anything, right? They go with surface impressions and don't bother researching nothing. Don't bother reading Enough Already by me, 2021, that has the whole thing in there. It's in the New York Times, dude. Hey, look, man, anyone could just Google the New York Times. Just go New York Times, Elizabeth Cheney, Muslim Brotherhood, Syria. And it'll come right up. In fact, I have it right here. U.S. building ties with Assad opponents in Syria, November 2006 in the New York Times. So in other words, Elizabeth Cheney is guilty of high treason and material support for terrorism, for bin Ladenite, suicide bomber, head chopper, terrorist murderers in Syria. But the Republicans, the Trump people can't make hay of that. And I guess the Democrats don't care. The Democrats are like, yeah, that's how you know that she's a great voice when she speaks up for us and says that we can be trusted to continue on such treasonous policies in the near-term future here. What a world, huh? Hey, how about this? As long as I'm ranting about material support for terrorism, I already knew, Liam, that September 11th hijackers had been involved in Bosnia and Chechnya. But then I wrote a book about it. And in fact, if you remember in the Bill Clinton book, as I said before, in Fool's Errand and Enough Already, I'm just trying to get through the Bill Clinton years so I can get you to September 11th and the aftermath, right? So I only gave like a 1-page short shrift to, by the way, Bill Clinton backed the terrorists in Bosnia and Kosovo and Chechnya, you know, and I have a lot of footnotes, but that's about it. Gave you like 1 page on that in Enough Already. I forgot what I say about it in Fool's Errand. I think about the same thing. Well, here I got entire mini chapters, you know, subsections here on Chechnya. Well, first Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. Bosnia, Kosovo, and the H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton years, and then Chechnya in the Bill Clinton and George W. Bush years. And man, a lot of the September 11th hijackers had fought in Bosnia and Chechnya on Bill Clinton's side.
It's really bad. I just read that again last night. Really it's so bad.
It's so bad.
And there's really quick. There's a quote again to talk about Biden's legacy here. There's a quote where he refers to one of the people operating in Chechnya as the George Washington of, or no, this was Kosovo. Yeah. He says the George Washington of Kosovo, and he was indicted. What was it? 2018, 2019 for trafficking and selling organs on the black market.
Yeah. In other words, kidnapping Serbs and knocking them out and cutting their organs out of their still living bodies, sometimes to death, sometimes leaving them short a kidney or whatever, but oftentimes murdering them in the process, of course. So it's not black market like, oh, they just like exploited poor people into selling organs outside of official channels. No, we're talking about murdering people, stealing the organs out of their bodies. That's Hashim Thaisi. He's on trial in The Hague right now. And yes, Joe Biden called him the George Washington of Kosovo. And you can look that up on YouTube. And I downloaded the video to save it because there's only one video of it on YouTube. And I'm afraid that it's going to get link rotted and disappeared someday. So I saved it. I have it.
If you send it to me, I'll embed it in this video and play it.
You see the force behind it? George Washington. George Washington of Kosovo.
But yeah, like I was very shocked to see. I mean, how many of the hijackers were actually in Chechnya?
I'm sorry, I don't remember right off the top of my head the number, but it's many of them and the men that recruited them.
I think it's more than half.
These are the guys, dude. Yeah. They fought in Bosnia. Some of them had fought in Bosnia and in Chechnya. And this is, I don't know, man. Ali Soufan, the former former FBI agent investigating the Cole attack, who could have stopped 9/11 if the CIA had shared everything they had with him. I believe him about that. I think he's an honest guy. Ali Soufan said that the Chechens asked bin Laden, what's your problem with the Americans? Why do you want to target the Americans? We don't understand. They've been so helpful to us in Bosnia and in Kosovo and here and in Afghanistan before that. Why would we attack them? Because they were Chechens, they didn't understand about Palestine and about the occupations of Saudi Arabia and the bombing and blockade of Iraq in the 90s. They didn't understand bin Laden's broad vision of American imperialism and world Islamist revolution and all this crap. They didn't get that. They were just fighting the Russians, and America was helping them. America and Saudi and England were helping them fight the Russians. And so they didn't understand. They asked bin Laden, but the Americans are our friends. Liam, this is in 2001, bro. This is right in the lead up to September 11th. You had American Delta Force training KLA terrorists in Kosovo who were, and Delta are the highest guys. I didn't even know they used Delta to train guys. Why wouldn't you just send Rangers to train? They had Delta training KLA terrorists who were then invading Macedonia, trying to create a greater Kosovo to absorb, Albanian, ethnic Albanian dominated parts of Macedonia and integrate that into Kosovo. And they were only routed and driven out of the country and evacuated by the Americans in August of 2001. And look, go to Colleen Rowley for your younger listeners. Colleen Rowley was, and I know her personally, I've interviewed her many times, and we worked together at an institution and these kinds of things. I know her very well. She's a wonderful lady. And she was Time Magazine Person of the Year in 2002. Why? Because she blew the whistle on the prior knowledge. Now, you may be too young. I guess you are too young. Let me tell you the real history of America, okay? After September 11th, no one in major media, maybe there was a story in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times here or there, but essentially the question was never broached in public discussion. What did the Bush government know, and when did they know it about bin Ladenites in this country in the lead up to September 11th? No one talked about that in major media at all, until May of 2002, when Colleen Rowley came out with her letter that she wrote to the Senate and then, I guess, published and was featured, and I forget now if it was the Post or if it was Time Magazine or whatever it was that featured her first. But she ended up getting Time Person of the Year. And here was her story. She was a lawyer at the Minneapolis, Minnesota FBI office, where Zacharias Moussaoui, who is misleadingly called the 20th hijacker, he was not. He had a separate mission for later. But Zacharias Moussaoui was a bin Ladenite, and he was here for flight school training. And he was so transparent about the fact that he really wasn't interested in learning how to take off or land. And he had all this money, but he didn't seem like he should have that much money. He wasn't like dressed nice enough to justify having this much cash kind of a guy. You know what I mean? So he was suspicious. And somebody at the flight school called the FBI, and the local FBI office immediately, one of their agents just speculated. It makes total sense. This kid was talking about flying from Heathrow to New York. He could hit the World Trade Center, the guy speculated. And the FBI agents, they wanted what's called a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant, the kind they got illegally against Carter Page, the American patriot, to spy on Donald Trump. Now, under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, they don't need probable cause that you committed a crime to believe, hey, Judge, we think, as it says in the Fourth Amendment, we think that Liam, that if we search him, we will find proof of this crime that we have probable cause to believe he committed. None of that. For a FISA warrant, all they need is a reasonable belief that you are an agent of a foreign power or a foreign terrorist group. And we don't care if you do nothing but go bowling all day. It's who you are. You're tapped. You're under surveillance under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, an extremely low fishing expedition level of burden of proof, right? And they said, we want a FISA warrant to search this guy's computer. And in Washington, and I name the guys in the book because damn them forever, the supervisors in Washington turned them down and refused to give them permission. And she was the lawyer, and she knew that they were well within their rights to search this guy. And what had happened was they followed up with French intelligence. And French intelligence confirmed to them that it is an established fact that this guy and his brother are both recruiters for the bin Ladenites in Chechnya. And Khattab and Basayev, the two main bosses of the insurgency in Chechnya, were both directly tied to Osama bin Laden and had been to Afghanistan multiple times. And there's just no way you'd call this anything but, if Al-Qaeda in Iraq is Al-Qaeda, then Al-Qaeda in Chechnya is Al-Qaeda, dude. I'm sorry. This isn't like, oh, Al-Qaeda linked because, you know, like Al-Shabaab, 6 years after their insurgency started, they declared loyalty to Al-Qaeda in exchange for a bag of gold coins or whatever. No. Like this is really bin Laden's men here. And FBI said, no, we like the terrorists in Chechnya. Well, they didn't say that directly, but that was the implication, was we don't recognize these guys as being terrorists. If your guy Moussaoui is tied to bin Ladenite, suicide bomber, head chopper, lunatics in Chechnya, well, that's not a foreign terrorist group. That's just an insurgency. So you can't have a FISA warrant. And then on September 11th, they said, now can we have our FISA warrant? And they still put them off, Liam. They still put them off until like later that night. And they said, oh, geez, I guess maybe George Tenet said, geez, I wonder if this has anything to do with that guy in Minneapolis. And then they finally broke the guy's computer open, and the information in the computer traced directly back to the hijackers in Florida. And if they'd done their job, they could have rolled up the entire cell and stopped September 11th from ever happening. And why didn't they do that? We like the terrorists in Chechnya. That's why, they said. Man, and then think about that. Like, that was just day one of the terror war. They killed 4 million people and drove 37 million out of their homes and blew $10 trillion and killed 7,000 American soldiers and drove 30,000 to suicide since then. They boom busted the whole world economy twice since then.
Yeah, and to your point that, you know, we're really lucky that the reaction in Russia was to get someone like Putin. I mean, the fact that we were funding these people or supporting these people in Chechnya and Kosovo, for him to turn around and then still try to, in a gesture of support after 9/11, say, we understand your pain, rather than say like, well, look, this is what you did to us. Right. I mean, it's crazy. And after this,
joked about Putin that like, we're lucky he's such a psychopath, dude.
Yeah.
Like if he had feelings, we'd be in real trouble, right? Like, yeah. I don't know if you probably haven't gotten this far in the book yet, but it's in the book where, and you may remember when this happened, that during the Syria war about a decade ago, Prince Bandar bin Sultan went and met with Putin and told him to his face, hey, listen, I can prevent the terrorists from attacking the Sochi Olympics. And Putin said, listen, these threats are contrary to the spirit of cooperation against international terrorism. Good day, sir. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, can you imagine saying to Putin, I could send suicide bombers to blow up your Olympics? Like he could have just done like a judo move and choked Bandar out, cut his throat. I might have. What'd you say to me? You just threaten my Olympics with suicide bombers? How about I take your life? That's probably what I would have said to Prince Bandar bin Sultan, whose men did 9/11 too. And Putin said, sir, this is contrary to the spirit of cooperation between our two nations on this important issue. Oh my God. Wow. Good thing that he's such a psycho and is so out of touch with what it's like to have feelings or emotions that he doesn't react to things like that. Like he definitely heard what he said clearly, but instead of declaring war on Saudi Arabia, you know, I could erase Riyadh from the face of the earth permanently in an instant, right? Instead of saying that, he said, geez, I really wish that we could cooperate better on issues of international terrorism, sir. Let's go get some hors d'oeuvres. What
and after 3 years.
Yeah. Count your blessings.
After 3 years of this war, I mean, it's unbelievable. I attribute the fact that this hasn't boiled over really to him. I mean, thank God for his restraint. Obviously, he's no libertarian leader. We're not we don't think that he's the ideal leader for Russia or whatever. We're not celebrating him in that way, but without his restraint, I mean, this probably would have boiled over. But I do want to get into where this war is heading, the current state of it. But really quick, I just kind of have a question that I'm interested in. So a lot of these names, like I alluded to, keep popping up throughout the book. And the one character that I'm particularly interested in is William Burns, because like we know about the "Niet means Niet" memo, and you quote him throughout the book. You quote him in the Bush Senior chapter and the Clinton chapters as just like having, I think, incredible foresight. And, you know, it's sort of baffling to see all of these quotes, and then also to know that he is our current CIA director. And I'm just wondering what you make of that. Is the CIA in lockstep with the Biden administration, the Pentagon, and everyone on this policy? Or, I mean, because to me, it sounds like he understands the situation, but I also don't know if he just understands the situation, but is in favor of it. So what do you make of him?
Yeah, bureaucrats, you know. If you ever read like Colin Powell, he talks about like how important it is to just serve your bosses well. They got elected, they know what they're doing, and your job is to do your job loyally and this kind of thing. You know what I mean? So like where you might think that he would say, "No, Mr. President, stop." Like that's not his job, right? His job is to say, "Well, Mr. President, here's what we know and here's your options," and whatever. And like, you know, the degree to which he's allowed to persuade, you know, or would take the liberty to go so far as to this or that. Like we can't really know, you know what I mean? Like all that is really very private. I will tell you that if you go back and I'm totally embarrassed by this. This is the most ridiculous thing in the world. The most viral clip of me ever by click count is a clip of me on Fox News that they promoted, that they clipped out of the Kennedy show, of me saying that I don't think there's going to be a war. And the thing is, I wasn't saying that's because Putin's an angel and he would never do such a thing. My reasoning was Burns will guide Biden through this. Burns knows exactly what the issues are. And clearly, look, the issues really, really all the way brass tacks come down to NATO membership and alleged missile defense, because missile defense means dual use launchers that can host Tomahawk attack H-bomb cruise missiles. Okay. And so these are the brass tacks, and Burns knows that as well as anyone. And so does Biden. And I thought that Burns was going to see Biden through this. That, look, man, what the Russians really need is a solid assurance about this and about that. But you go back and you look at what happened is they were not willing to make the diplomatic effort to try to stop the war. And I think you can see in their thinking that it's too late anyway. It had already been decided by the end of the summer, maybe even by the previous spring. Now, this is happening. And so when Burns went and talked to Putin at the beginning of November, we didn't find this out until later. Burns went to Moscow, but Putin was in Sochi, but he was in Moscow and met with Lavrov, and then he talked to Putin on a Zoom call or something. And Putin just lectured him for half an hour and said over and out, or whatever was the original story anyway. And the point was that they're going to war. That's it. The decision's already been made. And so at that point, they would only go through, like, if you remember how it played out, right? They would only do like the most ceremonial type negotiations. The way that they played it was, you better not do it. And if you do, we're going to arm up Ukraine. Mostly, we're going to arm up an insurgency against you, because everybody thought, and the CIA did think, that the Ukrainian military would be smashed quickly and that it would be an Afghanistan or Syria type insurgency that we'd be backing. And just we're going to drive up the costs, as they always put it: send home coffins, send home body bags, send home dead Russians, drive up the cost, hurt Putin over the long run, strategic defeat over the long run, fight to the last Ukrainian. And so that was where I had just made a severe lapse in judgment, and I'll take responsibility for it. And the truth of the matter is, I was trying to wrap up my damned audiobook of enough already. And I was nitpicking. There's these little clicks, the Dr. Pepper clicks in my mouth after I say S word or words that ends in an S and whatever. And I was just like, I was not reading antiwar.com every day. I was not reading the Post of Times and the Journal on all the latest developments. I was focused on fighting the last war. And I was outsourcing a lot of my thinking and my information to my guests on my show. And like Ray McGovern, for example, who was convinced that Burns is going to see McGovern through this. And I know in hindsight that, no, if I had been reading the Post, the Times, and the Journal religiously on this every day, I would have known better. That, dude, they want this fight. They are not trying to stop it. Or they've already accepted that it's inevitable. And so they're already working on what to do after it happens. But they're not really going to the lengths. There was no way. And look, they could have just called his bluff, Liam. What he was saying was, I wanted in a treaty that you're not bringing Ukraine into NATO, and I wanted in a treaty you're not going to put any defensive missiles in there, missile launchers there. Well, Biden had already said, and I believe that he meant, and he still says this to this day, and I believe that he means it to this day. Hey, he has no intention of bringing Ukraine into NATO. Are you stupid? There's no way we're going to do that. And he's not going to put defensive missile launchers that could host Tomahawks 200 miles from Moscow in Kharkiv. He had no intention of doing that. But he would rather do that, maybe rather die, than sign a treaty promising not to. Because that would be giving in. That would be appeasing Hitler, and you can never do that. And so over and over, they just explain this in such stark language too, is just the most ridiculous thing. That, look, the policy is that we have an open door to NATO. And that means that no other country can tell any other country that they're not allowed to join. Only we can tell a country they're not allowed to join. But if Ukraine wants to join, that ain't none of Russia's business. No how. And we'll be damned before we take their opinion into consideration in any way, because that would be what? Negotiating with evil or whatever. That would be surrendering to Putin. At the same time, they told the Ukrainians and they told the world, and they've said it over and over again the whole time, we're not bringing Ukraine into NATO. Are you kidding me? It's one of the most corrupt countries in the world. It's corrupt as Ghana, right? Is as corrupt as Afghanistan under American rule, okay? It's as corrupt as any nation state or economic system in world history. And they have an ongoing border dispute, and massive ethnic division. And there's just no way in the world that we could get consensus among the other NATO states to bring them in, or even in Washington to bring them into the alliance. But they'll die over our principle that you can't say that they can't join, though. And you could really boil the whole war down to that's what it's about. Because I really do believe, and maybe they're right, but they should have called this bluff then. Putin goes, look, all I want is a treaty that says neutrality and no missile launchers. If that's their policy anyway, they could have called this bluff, signed the treaty, and then when he invaded anyway, they could say, see, we did the right thing and he invaded anyway. But they didn't do that. And I don't think he would have invaded anyway. I think he was playing, as I said on that Kennedy clip, he's playing a game of extremely coercive diplomacy, and he's trying to get us to back down. And my mistake, and your question was about Burns, sorry. My mistake was thinking that Burns was going to see Biden through this. Because yes, going back to, I think my first quote of him is from 1995 saying, man, we should not be doing, no, you're wrong. No, I'm wrong. You're right. Under H.W. Bush, he's saying we should not be doing this. He's at the embassy in Moscow and warning about all this stuff and intentions toward NATO expansion. The entire Moscow embassy was against it. And then all throughout. And the guy, I'm not saying like he's great, but I'm just saying he's essentially an honest and hardworking wonk who, he's the guy, for people not familiar with the Niet means Niet memo, it's at WikiLeaks, and it's him telling Condoleezza Rice in 2008 warning her against offering a membership action plan for NATO, the so-called MAP, and saying, you can't do this. It's the brightest, says it's the brightest of red lines for the Russians. There's absolute consensus on this issue from the most enlightened liberal to the most reactionary right-wing knuckle dragger in the recesses of the Kremlin. He says, we just cannot do this. He then follows up with an email, a personal email to Secretary Rice. And he at one point he says, listen, if I haven't convinced you yet, you might as well stop reading now. Because like, I don't know what else to say to you. Like, you know, and he goes on after that, but like, he's like, man, you've got to see. And then what they do, they went ahead anyway. You know, George W. Bush, you know, like I met some liberals the other day, actually last night, trick-or-treating. And they asked about, well, what's the book about or whatever. And I know they're like, oh, this is such a liberal issue. You know what I mean? That like, oh, we know we stand with Ukraine. And then, so I said, well, put it this way. Like if I told you that George W. Bush sometimes made unwise decisions in foreign policy, you'd be like, all right, that sounds like that might be right. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's what the book's about. Okay. The book is about George W. Bush should not have done that. You know, and yes, that's true for his father and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and John McCain and Hillary and everybody all the way through. But like, boy, if there's one big, I'd take that back. It's W. Bush at Bucharest in April 2008. It's just like invading Iraq in 2003. Just a massive unforced error that, man, we told you so. You don't have to do this, dude. And then he does it anyway. And it's just, God damn him, man. And you know, the worst thing about him is he's not even smart enough to think about yesterday or last year or 10 years ago or regret anything. I've heard him say before, do you have any regrets about the wars? And he goes, come on. Decisions are things that people make. And once a decision is made, you can't go around second guessing decisions that you made because what good is that going to do? So like, nah, I don't think about the past at all, he said. Like that, no, that's the rest of humanity's burden to carry, not George W. Bush's.
Well, so you alluded to the fact that they were planning on funding an insurgency on Russia's border. And there's the famous clip of Hillary Clinton on MSNBC basically saying that that will be the strategy. And I think you pointed out that that was plan A. And plan B was actually that Zelensky's government would stay intact and they would just arm them.
The Russians invaded Afghanistan back in 1980. And although no country went in, they certainly had a lot of countries supplying arms and advice and even some advisors to those who were recruited to fight Russia. We have to watch this carefully. We have to provide sufficient military armaments for the Ukraine military and volunteers. And we have to keep tightening the screws.
When I hear that, it makes me think that ultimately their end goal is like regime change in Russia. I know that you said that they probably don't, like, they probably know that they can't do that because they have nukes. But at the same time, it seems like all of this is oriented toward the idea that they cannot tolerate having a nationalistic right-wing government in Europe with that big of a country. And it seems like ultimately it's all aimed at eventually having a liberal Russia that is under their security blanket that is NATO. Do you agree with that? Do you think that that's ultimately their goal?
Yeah, you know, my problem is I have such a hard time imagining how the hell they think they're going to do this, right? It's sort of like in a man, I remember, goddamn, it was Bob Dornan. Wasn't it Bob Dornan? Nah, I take that back. I forget now. I think it was. Yeah, it was Bob Dornan. I remember him saying on CNN or one of these, maybe Fox News, and they go, okay, so like after we overthrow Assad, then who's going to take power then? And he goes, well, We'll just have to hope that someone comes to the fore. Like, what? So you have to, dude, the only organized opposition in Syria is the Muslim Brotherhood. And in Syria, they're basically bin Ladenites, right? They're not like in Qatar where they sit in the parliament, or in Egypt where they're a bunch of doctors and lawyers and landowners. In Syria, they're bin Ladenite head chopper lunatics, dude. There ain't no one else going to come to the fore. What the hell is that? To the fore. You have no plan? You're going to do a regime change and you got nothing but head choppers waiting in the wings. And you're going to like figure it out later. Same kind of thing here, I guess. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to bankrupt Russia, and we're going to destabilize Russia. And I have quotes of Newland and Madeleine Albright and all these other people just daydreaming. They don't seem to have a real plan. We're just going to ruin Russia to the point that the elite of Russia, the oligarchs, all turn on Putin and overthrow him. And then, like, do they have a guy in mind on the payroll that's working for them, ready to go? Probably not, right? Like, they're just crossing their fingers. But just think about the level of destabilization that could break out if somebody were to, say, try to assassinate Putin and replace him. But no, his other cabinet members say, no, it should be me, not you. And then nobody knows who's in charge in the Kremlin, and nobody knows who's keeping watch on all those nukes and what. Like, you gotta be absolutely out of your mind to want to destabilize Russia. Let Putin grow old and die. We could do a lot worse, you know? And so, yes, I think you're right that, like, in the broadest sense, that's what they'd like to see. That's what strategic defeat is supposed to bring, is some kind of regime change. But I don't think they've got any better plan for what's supposed to happen, or who's supposed to be in charge. And, you know, it's funny, dude. Robert Gates, he was the deputy director of CIA, or hell, he was director of CIA. He had been deputy director under William Casey in the 80s. He was director of CIA as the Soviet Union fell. Or maybe he was still deputy director, because he was deputy director when he went to Moscow on February 9th, 1990. He was still deputy director. When did William Casey die? That was earlier. Maybe he got passed over for director first. Anyway, whatever. Robert Gates, same guy that was Secretary of Defense for W. Bush and Barack Obama, right? The guy that did the Libya war crime. I'm sorry, I just get distracted when I'm talking about Robert Gates. He explained very clearly why the H.W. Bush government wanted Moscow to hold on to as much of the Soviet republics as possible, including Ukraine. They actually wanted them to keep the USSR. And it was all about maintaining a monopoly control over those H-bombs, man. Tens of thousands of H-bombs at that time. And the idea of continuing to break up Russia after they had lost the East, this has come up. This is in later chapters in the book. You'll see when you get to the Biden section, I got a bit about these people with all their brave talk about breaking Russia into 15 more pieces. And they have, you know, a map of the new states of Northern Asia where they have broken, you know, Moscow is now a tiny little, you know, nation, European-sized nation in the far west, and all the rest of Russia has all these new international borders there and all this. And Robert Gates has criticized this again in our time. Same guy, as absolutely bananas. Are you completely crazy that this is what you want to do? Because what you're talking about now is what? Now 8 new nuclear weapon states? That's what you want? Is to turn Asia into just, you know, and look, I'm not a big monopoly statist gun control type, but geez, on H-bombs, I think before we break up Russia, we got to figure out what we're going to do with those H-bombs. And, you know, I have a quote from one of these hawks, and he says, oh, the H-bombs? Yeah, well, we'll have to figure out a way to defang Russia's nuclear teeth. And then he just goes on about how we're going to break up Russia some more. And it's like, no, stupid. There's no such thing as that. Think of a way to pull their nuclear teeth? What the hell does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. Are you saying you're going to confiscate their hydrogen bombs? Because no, you're not. Not without getting my hometown nuked, you're not. So shut up. Who in the world could believe in this stuff? You got to be so far up Washington, D.C.'s rear end. These people just breathing their own crack smoke about what the future needs to hold. And then I got to resort to citing Robert Gates going, hey, guys, listen, I've killed a few million people in my life, but I'm saying that's probably enough. We can not kill billions more. Let's try not to lose a World War II worth of people in 45 minutes. OK, if we can avoid that.
Yeah. And I guess this is just, what Mises pointed out about bureaucracy. I guess this is the real problem with it, is that it's really hard to pin down who exactly is responsible, and the policy will be consistent throughout executive, whoever's the president, whoever's the head of some department. Like you could get William Burns in there, CIA director, CIA seems to be in control of much of foreign policy, but it doesn't really matter. And then I think all of this is just making me think it's even more baffling that they're continuing with this policy when they have Avril Haines as the director of national intelligence saying that Russia will use nukes if they feel they're about to lose this war or if their regime is threatened.
We don't want to have a situation in which actors are using nuclear weapons. Our view is, as General Barrier indicated, that there is not a sort of an imminent potential for Putin to use nuclear weapons. We perceive that, as I indicated in my statement, as something that he is unlikely to do unless there is effectively an existential threat to his regime and to Russia from his perspective. We do think that that could be the case in the event that he perceives that he is losing the war in Ukraine, and that NATO, in effect, is sort of either intervening or about to intervene in that context, which would obviously contribute to a perception that he is about to lose the war in Ukraine.
And if their ultimate goal is to ignore Avril Haines and say, okay, well, we still want to pursue a policy which is to threaten their regime and get rid of them, it's baffling to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have a quote in there of Barry McCaffrey, who had done the war crime of the highways of death slaughters on Highway 8 and I think 81 there in southern Iraq in 1991. It's a war criminal. No one should ever forget that about him. There's a great quote of him talking about, oh, come on, we can't allow ourselves to be self-deterred over them threatening nuclear war. What do you mean self-deterred? You mean deterred by their threat of nuclear war. That is the whole point of the threat of nuclear war, is to deter you, war criminal, guilty war criminal Barry McCaffrey. But whatever, man. Okay, tough guy. So if they break out nuclear weapons, well, that's fine. Then you know what he said? He said it's just another way to kill people. Barry McCaffrey said that. And he knows, because he's a mass murderer, a guilty war criminal from the highways of death massacres. What is
that for the audience who doesn't know what that is? Who is Barry McCaffrey?
Well, when he was Bill Clinton's drug czar, back to right-wing militarist liberal Democrat president showing what tough guys they are, he hired a war criminal from Iraq War I who had slaughtered all the retreating Iraqi soldiers leaving Kuwait as they fled to be his drug czar. Hey, out of area or out of business, dude. If we don't have a war in Europe or the Middle East to fight yet, we're going to have to go hunt down some cocaine kingpins in Latin America or something, aren't we? That's who Barry McCaffrey is. He's a rent seeker. He's a Bradley fighting vehicle salesman is what he is. And I'm sure he lives in a very, very nice house with helpers, with gardeners and cooks and maids to cater to him. He's a little perfumed prince. That's what Colonel Hackworth called him, perfume prince. Him and Wesley Clark. Probably never won an actual fight in his life. Just sent other people to kill other people. But anyway, he says, look, if the Russians break out nukes, fine, we'll just break out bigger nukes and tell them that they better back down or whatever. You can't stop us. You can't deter us with nukes. We have nukes. That's who's in charge, right? Like these kids, they're stupid. They're like little kids. And they all speak in slogans. You know how many times, dude, just Google, somebody else test me. I don't know. I didn't look this up specifically, but just look how many times people compare Putin to a schoolyard bully. Oh, you know what Putin is? He's a schoolyard bully. And you know what you have to do to a schoolyard bully? You punch him in the nose. Oh, God. Yeah, in other words, you don't know anything about it, right? In other words, you're a Democrat. And my only consolation when I die in the nuclear war is that they will all burn too.
So I was thinking that maybe I should have started with this just to like lay down the stakes, but I think we should talk about nuclear war. And I've heard you mention this book on other podcasts, Annie Jacobson's Nuclear War. And then I also have your Hotter Than the Sun. I think they should be read together. Because I listen
an excise chapter that I cut out for space. That's about another 30 pages that if I'm going to have people sign up for my email list, if you want to get the nuclear war chapter once the book comes out.
Yeah. And, I listened to her audiobook, Jacobson's audiobook, and it's terrifying. And I cannot wait. I heard that one of my favorite directors is going to be adapting it into a movie. And I'm hoping that we get to see it and it scares people out of the current direction we're going. I was hoping that Oppenheimer would do that for many people. But
I said they were, oh, that's neat. You said right. For nukes. Well, man, I sure hope this is probably the single most important thing about the possibility of a second Trump presidency is the chance that he would make a deal with North Korea. Which, the Democrats just have George W. Bush's policy, which is abject, total surrender on North Korea's part. Give up every nuke, do everything we say, and then we'll consider negotiating with you. Yeah, right. And that was Obama's policy for 8 years, and that's been Biden's policy for 4.
And for people who haven't read Jacobson's book, it starts with a hypothetical situation where North Korea launches nukes at the United States, and we don't know exactly why. But essentially, because of it, we have to launch nukes back, but it doesn't fly over Russia. It triggers Russia into launching nukes too. There's this miscommunication. And, we're coming up on the anniversary of Able Archer. And I think it's this month. And there's just so many situations like this where there could be a miscommunication. There could be, an escalation.
In all the close calls where especially Russians' faulty technology told them that America was attacking them, and their lower level military officers said, nah, I don't know. We've been getting along great with the Americans lately. They're going to do a sneak attack with one nuke. I don't know. I don't believe it. But right now, if their faulty technology said America was launching a sneak attack on Moscow, are they going to give us the same benefit of the doubt? It's a real danger. And their technology sucks, by the way. People should look up, and this is part of the book there. She cites Ted Postal from MIT, and he talks he's written all about this. You can find this anywhere. Just type in Ted Postal, Russian satellites, and he talks about how, America can detect any missile launch anywhere in the world in an instant with our satellites. The Russians don't have that. The Russians have side-looking satellites that can try to detect plumes over the horizon. Sometimes Russian satellites identify the sun and the moon and clouds as nuclear attacks, as nuclear missiles coming over the horizon. And they go, oh no, whoops, that's just a cloud. Don't worry. But they make those mistakes. Their sensors sometimes can't tell the difference between a sunrise and a nuclear attack. And so they could make a real bad decision based on a miscommunication very easily. And, people really should study these. It doesn't take much to understand, the atom bombs are the little ones. The kind of bomb that they dropped on Nagasaki is a plutonium implosion bomb. It's about 15 kilotons. That's the kind of bomb that you use as the blasting cap to set off a thermonuclear bomb, a hydrogen bomb. You have to make it hotter than the sun in order to allow for nuclear fusion to take place. Hear about like cold fusion? Remember on Back to the Future 2, he's got Mr. Fusion on the back of his car. You just throw banana peels in there, whatever. But the thing is, that's the miracle. That's the holy grail of all science. Cold fusion, where you can fuse atoms together at room temperature and get unlimited energy out of it. In fact, the only way that we know of so far to fuse atoms together is first you have to make it hotter than the sun by setting off a Nagasaki nuke-sized percussion cap to then allow for the hydrogen isotopes to fuse together and create explosions in the high kilotons and even into the megatons. And the Russians have thousands, about 1,500, 1,700 deployed, so many as 7,000 in reserve of these bombs, and including in the multi-megaton range, where you're talking about one bomb could kill all 5 boroughs of New York City. Okay, could take out the entire eastern seaboard from, wherever. All of America's, naval bases on the East Coast in New Jersey and whatever, in just a couple of shots. You take out everything. Destroy. Imagine a bomb, one bomb, 1 or 2 or 3, able to take out all of Houston, all of Dallas. He's absolutely hurt. All of Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles area from Westwood to downtown. And just a few 2, 3, 4H bombs would kill everybody. Be the end of everything. Estimates have that within the first half hour, 45 minutes of the war, you would have losses equivalent to World War II. And importantly, it's almost impossible to have all the war games that have run show this, that it's virtually impossible to have a limited nuclear war. Once people start throwing atom bombs around, now it's use them or lose them. If we don't launch all of our H bombs out of their silos now, the Russians are going to nuke them in their silos, and we can't let them get away with that. So we launch everything we have. And that's what happens in the book here. The Russians and the Americans each have about 1,000 targets in each other's country ready to go at a moment's notice. And that's what would happen. We'd lose 1,000 of our most important targets in the country. And then whatever, I don't know if that includes our bases in East Asia or excludes them, whatever by that count. But that would mean that we lose every single major military base in the United States and all of our major cities, all of them. There would be towns left over, but it would, and the same thing for Europe, and then same thing for Russia. It would be the absolute end of Western civilization, of European civilization, of Christendom as it was for the last 2,000 years would be completely erased. All that we built for over millennia and over, again, Dipernovska floppa flip that even my wife, who's from Ukraine and absolutely hates Russia, can't pronounce. I tried to make her pronounce it. Dipernovka flippa floppa. Nobody cares. Nobody cares who rules Dipernovka frocka frock.
Well, and Annie Jacobson does a really good job of leading you chapter by chapter through the nuclear infrastructure of the United States. But the one thing that I didn't see or hear throughout it was mention of the nuclear sponge, and you cover that in Hotter Than the Sun. So my parts in the country get blown up first because we have nukes. Could you talk about the nuclear triad and what the strategy is there?
Sure. Now, so for the ultimate sourcing on this, you guys want to look up Tom Collina with 2 L's, and he's the expert on this. I've interviewed him about it, and he's written about it numerous times for Defense One and other publications. And essentially, so the triad means that we have air-delivered missiles from planes. It means we have sub-delivered missiles, and it means we have land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so I believe everything that we have deployed in Europe now would just be air delivered from planes. Now, the INF Treaty is dead. Ronald Reagan's great achievement, probably the greatest achievement of his life from 1987, is gone, thanks to Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, both, who tore it up. Trump first. But I don't think that they've deployed nukes, new medium-range nukes in Europe yet, although I'm certain they're going to. probably in the near term here. But as far as land-based missiles, they're all here in the United States, and they're mostly in Montana, Idaho, certainly Montana, Nebraska, Colorado, and the Dakotas. And the purpose of them, basically, see, they're second strike missiles. They're not for the first strike against the Soviet Union. They're for the retaliatory strike. And then the idea is that they are also the nuclear sponge, that the reason that they're there and in the doctrine, part of the retaliatory strike is to lure the Russians into targeting them. And hopefully once the Russians launch everything they have against those silos, then we'll launch everything we have from those silos. It'll be too late for the Russians to stop them. But we, meaning Washington, will have tricked Russia into launching their arsenal against the wide open plains and northern rural states of Montana and the Dakotas and spare the coasts, which of course is not true. The coasts all get nuked too, but just not as bad because they'll have to waste so many nukes trying to target all the spread out silos of Montana. And so that's the point. The middle part of the country is the nuclear sponge. Like, dude, how are the people on the East Coast supposed to eat after Nebraska has been completely irradiated? You know what I mean? I don't know. That's how they think, man. That's their game theory.
Kalina makes a really good case that the nuclear sponge, or the I guess third leg of the triad, isn't even necessary. Like, you don't actually need it to be based in the United States. Like, it could be on.
Listen, let me tell you, one submarine can destroy all of Russia. Okay, one sub can launch 250 something nukes, dude, because it can carry. I'm sorry, all the math, but they got the multiple re-entry vehicles on each of those Polaris missiles, and she does the math in the book. I'm sorry, I can't do it off the top of my head, but one American submarine can destroy all of Russia, all of it, 250 targets from one sub. So we don't need any of this stuff. And no one can track our subs. No one can take out America's subs. That's the whole point. They are invulnerable because you can't find them. They're the entire Pacific Ocean of Rome. And we got a huge fleet of them. You know, we got enough just on our subs to take out the whole Northern Hemisphere. And then, of course, there's all the multiple studies about nuclear winter. And I think sometimes maybe there's some hyperbole about this, or maybe just in people's imagination, you think of just like a blizzard in July and it just seems unreal. But you don't need a blizzard in July. All you need is for the crops to fail, man. All you need is for gray skies throughout the whole spring and summer and a loss of 4, 5, 6, 10 degrees. That's enough to kill all your crops, man. That's enough to kill billions of people. I mean, my grandpa used to say, the war breaks out, I hope the first one falls right on my head. I don't want to live in a world after a thermonuclear war, dude. It's going to be the ugliest goddamn thing. Beyond your imagination, beyond what Hollywood or video games can come up with for you to play in.
Well, in Montana's two senators, John Tester, who's up for re-election in a week, and Senator Steve Daines, both of opposing parties, Republican and Democrat, are a part of what you have called the nuke caucus, or you've told me about this before, and they're advocating for
their own term. That's their own name.
They call
the
it
Nuclear Weapons Caucus. Yeah,
and they're currently lobbying for Sentinel missiles to be brought to Montana. They're revamping this nuclear sponge, which, I mean, as you just said, like, the strategy is to lure weapons here. So they're literally lobbying, probably in exchange for, contributions during their elections or whatever, that their own constituents are a target in this upcoming nuclear war. So
that's right. Life has a George Carlin bit, right? Like, I take some radiation if I can get a job. What's the point of taking a job if you're dead, dude?
Yeah. Well, so I have just two more audience questions for you, and then I'll let you go. We're going to be up on about 2 hours. But so one of my friends is Ethan Holmes. I told you about him. He recently got he lost his job. He was working at Sputnik. He was
we ran his piece at antiwar.com.
Yeah, and everyone should check that out. It's a really good piece about his experience working with Sputnik and what it's like. It's not at all how the West, the United States politicians represent it. It was actually a really fair working environment. And he's a libertarian like us, grew up here in Montana. But he was asking, what impact do you think the influx of arms to Ukraine will have on the global black market weapons trade? Do you trust Western or Ukrainian oversight authorities to keep track of all weapons? And
no. I mean, they've been selling it on the black market from the very beginning, right? Like some of their people have gone to jail over it where they had to make an example out of somebody or whatever. But like, no, man, I don't know how many stingers they gave them. Those, the javelins are far more effective than tow missiles and are portable enough. And you could do a hell of a lot of damage with one of those for like, I don't know, an assassination team somewhere or somebody needs to take out a hard target. Stinger missiles. I mean, man, this is obviously a massive threat against civil aviation. And there have been Ladenite terrorists in Ukraine. There have been. I know it sounds crazy, man, but it's really true. And you can read it in the New York Times. The Chechen bin Ladenites and Kosovar bin Ladenites that went to fight with ISIS in Obama's dirty war in Syria and went to Ukraine. And they're still there to this day, some of them fighting. And so some sophisticated tech like that falls into the hands of bin Ladenites. You could see jumbo jets falling out of the sky, man. No question about that. Whether that is a real danger, there's no question. And that's been something that the American officials have been worried about that since 1986 when they first started sending them to Afghanistan. They said, boy, these things get out. We could lose some civilian airliners. Okay. That's not just like crazy talk. They've known that that's a danger of passing these things out this whole time. And then just overall, guns and ammo on the black market my only real concern for America, other than the U.S. government picking a fight with Russia and China that gets out of hand, is the bin Ladenites. I'm terrified of them. And I don't mean in the sense that like I think they're coming for me in northern Austin, Texas, but I just mean that I think they are the greatest thing. And I don't think they can bring down our country, but they can, as we saw with September 11th, they can do things that make our government bring down our country. Absolutely, they can. And any man, I don't know about women. I'm a boy, so I can speak for half of the population of the planet. Any man can think of 1,000 ways to destroy a soft target, right? Like you don't have to have experience being a CIA trained mercenary killer, but like, come on, man, take a gasoline truck and crash it into a ball game, or like take an automatic rifle to the airport and just kill everybody on this side of the security line, right? Or like whatever, man, there's a million of them. Like, what are you going to do? You can't lock down every group of civilians in America and keep them safe. And any determined bin Ladenite could make an absolute horror movie out of an unlimited number of scenes. Dude, a team of a few bin Ladenites could break into a nuclear power plant, blow up everything, and cause a meltdown. A team of 4 or 5 of them could hijack an airplane and crash it into whatever they want. That's not bullshit. We've seen it happen before. You know, in 1993, they were a few feet away from collapsing one tower into the other at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. With no time to escape, no hour to run down the stairs. You could have 20,000 killed in an instant. And so that's the danger of the bin Ladenites here and our government taking their eye off the ball of the bin Ladenites. And look, I wrote a whole book about how I refuse to extend to my government the mandate to go to war against the bin Ladenites, to kill them, to protect this country. They cannot be trusted with that writ. You see what happens when we ask them to kill bin Laden. They let him escape and they kill everybody else. Okay? But I don't want them interfering with Russia and Syria and Iran and Hezbollah when they're killing bin Ladenites. And as long as there is such a thing as the monopoly government, then yeah, like I want customs to keep them off of our shores. You know, it is a terrible danger what's happened with our government grooming these terrorists and provoking them alternatively over and over and over again, grooming these groups and then turning them against us and then refusing to do what's necessary to protect the people of this country from them. I mean, look at the Boston bombing. I have an entire chapter about the Boston bombing in the book too. The Russians tried to warn us about this guy and the Americans like, no, we like Chechen terrorists, so he's fine. And I'm still not sure exactly what was going on there. He may very well have been an FBI informant. Not that I think they put him up to this in one of those bogus stings. I think that's different. But they very well have let him back into the country just because, like, they thought at least that he was already working for them, that he was a friend among bin Ladenite terrorists in Chechnya long after September 11th, long after we lost 4,000 guys fighting against the bin Ladenite-led Sunni-based insurgency in Iraq War II. And they just don't take this threat seriously. Remember 10 years ago when Russia finally joined the war against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, the Americans all laughed. Remember Robert Gates, all this was like, now we're going to bog you down in a quagmire just like Afghanistan. Well, what are we doing to ourselves then in all these wars? It's only Afghanistan. Not even when we're in Afghanistan. Syria is Afghanistan when the Russians do it. But Afghanistan isn't even Afghanistan when we do it to ourselves. Okay. And same thing here, you know, and here they are. They're trying to replicate the Syria war and the 80s Afghan war against the Russians in Ukraine and in alliance with at least some Chechen bin Ladenites, and the blowback coming, man, I don't know, but I predict it's going to be horrible. And then Donald Trump, being functionally illiterate, is going to believe Israeli liars when they blame it on Shiites.
Yeah. And we've talked about the Giuliani moment before where Ron Paul obviously said that 9/11 was blowback for the Middle East wars and supporting all of them.
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there.
But I'm wondering, and Ethan asked this too, do you foresee that our weapons could be used against us by Ukrainians for abandoning them and actually like putting them through? Possibly. Yeah, I mean, because I think in hindsight, many Ukrainians are going to look back on this as the United States using them in a meat grinder, sacrificing them in their for their goal of defeating Russia, and ultimately abandoning them and lying to them, saying that they were going to protect them, and they're going to turn around and use these.
Pigs. Yeah, it's like the Bay of Pigs times a million, right? The Bay of Pigs was this catastrophe for people not familiar. JFK authorized the CIA to do an attempted regime change in Cuba. They didn't send in American troops, but they, provided the transportation to funnel in a bunch of right-wing Cubans to try to stop Castro. And they got bogged down in the muck of the jungle. There's a really great book about it. What's the guy's name? Sorry, if you search my site for Bay of Pigs, I interviewed this guy, Howard Jones. Yes, Howard Jones wrote a wonderful book about the Bay of Pigs. Anyway, I mean, the whole thing was over in a few days. This was the context of that quote, I'm going to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He never did that. Of course not. He hired them to keep trying to kill Castro after that. But anyway, that's all this is, right? It's just like H.W. Bush encouraging the Shiites to rise up against Saddam Hussein in 1991 and then turning his back on them and letting them be slaughtered. Just like Johnson and Nixon back in the Hmong tribesmen in Vietnam and then turning their back on them and letting them be slaughtered. And it's the same thing here. The Ukrainians, they're already deploying the stab in the back theory. The Americans and NATO, they promised us all this, but they only gave us that. And it's true. Yeah, that's right. Joe Biden stabbed you in the back. All right. Like, what can I say, dude? Yeah. They promised whatever it takes to drive Russia out of Ukraine. You've got to be kidding. Let me tell you what it would take to drive Russia out of Ukraine. The 82nd Airborne and the 3rd Infantry Division and the U.S. Marine Corps and Navy floating offshore. That's what it would take. Okay? And that's not going to happen. So forget it. Like, I'm sorry. They are, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but I mean like in the literal scientific definition, they are suckers. They got played and they got stabbed in the back by Uncle Sam, just like everybody. How could you trust the United States of America 3 months after the fall of Afghanistan? You know what's happening to the Hazaras right now? The Shiite Hazaras of Afghanistan that America promised to protect for 20 years, they're being slaughtered. America can't protect the Hazaras. And so they don't. And so they die. And our only safety there is they're too far away to get here and take their revenge against us. You know? But a bunch of Ukrainian Nazis who America's been grooming since the late 1940s, yeah, they're going to be pretty pissed off at the end of this thing, dude. And you know how the Nazis are with their stab in the back theories. They can make a lot of mileage out of that. And like, what can you say? It's absolutely true enough. It's absolutely true enough. You know, this guy, Alexei Arestovich, I think is how you say it, who had been a Zelensky advisor, who had predicted the war. You might have seen this clip where he goes, well, we have to get into a war with Russia first, and then we'll beat them, and then we'll join NATO and all this. He explained that in 2018 or 19 in this YouTube video. He explained the whole thing. It was like a plan. It wasn't a prediction. It was like a plan. This is what we're going to do. Because if we try to join NATO, they're going to invade. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to say we're going to join NATO, which will cause them to invade, but then we'll whoop them and drive them out, and then we'll join NATO after that's already settled, blah, blah, blah. That's what he's basically saying. And then he says later, he goes, we won our war. We kicked their ass in the first few months. We drove them to the table and they were willing to sign essentially for neutrality. They were going to keep just as much of the Donbass as they already had. They weren't even going to be able to keep their land bridge all the way to Crimea. We whooped them. We had them right where we wanted them. We were ready to sign a deal. And what did the Americans do? They came and told us, don't sign that deal. And then he adds the anecdote. They brought us to an air base in Germany where they showed us all these weapons they were going to give us. And they said, don't you worry. We're going to arm you up so good. You're going to whoop the Russians. You're going to drive them all the way out before we're done. And then he said, but they never followed through. They never brought those weapons. We finally got them 10 weeks later and only half as many as they promised. I'm paraphrasing poorly here, but the Americans didn't follow through on their big, big promises to the Zelensky government. Told them, yeah, go ahead. You and him keep fighting, but never gave them enough to win. Not that they probably could have, even with, if we'd given them our entire tank force, they probably still couldn't have won. But still, they never meant to really give them everything that they thought that they needed to win. Because as they said, the goal is to prolong the war. It wasn't really to help Ukraine win and drive Russia out. It was to, just like Afghanistan, to give them their own Vietnam, to drive them down, and just like bin Laden did to us, replicating our strategy against the Soviet Union, bog them down, bleed them to bankruptcy, force them out the hard way. Strategic defeat over the long term. And as they've all said over and over again, fight to the last Ukrainian. And now how are the Ukrainian, especially the very far, extremely Nazi radical right in Ukraine, how are they going to react to losing all of the Donbass and Crimea anyway? After all the sacrifices of all their great fascist heroes and everything, man, they're going to be pissed. And, Zelensky already actually threatened this. He goes, I don't know how all these Ukrainians are going to react to be left high and dry. Talking about Ukrainian refugees throughout Europe, saying, geez, who knows what they're going to do when they find out the way you guys have abandoned us. This kind of, he's threatening terrorist attacks from his stay behind guys. Dude, who do you think you are? Israel? You can't talk to me that way, boy. What? Man, I'm telling you, dude. Their biggest enemies are in the East. But, who do you hate more than your friend that betrayed you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I promise I got 2 more questions. I have one more audience question, and then I'll have a final question for you. So my friend Adam Thune, he's also a supporter of Human Reaction, is wondering if you could talk about like the advancement in military technology, specifically like the use of drone technology that has rendered multi-million-dollar equipment useless in the war, and then how this has like changed the operational, effect on the actual war itself. But then he's also curious about just like the propaganda operations, because Adam believes that like this is another generation of warfare. It's like 5th generation warfare, how they're using data to specifically use target specific populations to manipulate them. And he's wondering if all of this combined has like created a new weapon of mass destruction, and what you think of that.
Okay, well, so on the first part, yeah, I mean, drones have changed everything for people, watching the footage of the war closely and reading the updates of the war closely. You have essentially a World War I style trench battle with artillery and tanks. And then on top of that, these very low budget drones of all different descriptions that are being used on both sides. And just adding a whole other level of brutality to the thing. And like unreal footage of like guys on motorcycles being chased by drones, or like a guy like shoots one out of the sky. Did you see? I saw one like guy takes a baseball bat, like a soldier is running and has a baseball bat and knocks the damn thing out of the sky before it can explode and kill him. You got guys, they're wearing VR goggles. They're doing like first person view drone attacks and stuff. Like it's video game culture, like crazy, dude. It's a brave new world, man, in that way. People get mad at me, dude. People think that phrase only means like stuff that is referenced straight in the book, like going to the movies and taking your soma or whatever. But like, nuh-uh, dude. Anyway. It is a hell of a thing, and it's the future of combat. I mean, things are only going to get crazier along those levels, and look, man, on the question of like the obsolescence of extremely expensive weapon systems. I mean, look what happened. They put in the Abrams tanks and they were rendered absolutely obsolete immediately and withdrawn. Like within weeks, they were getting the crap blown out of them and were withdrawn. This is America's premier battle tank made for fighting against the Russians. And then on the second thing, as far as the war propaganda, I mean, I don't know, yellow journalism, it's the same old thing. And it's always been that way. And, network science and all that has sort of changed it. They're getting, I guess, more sophisticated in their delivery of propaganda, or at least they're, figuring out how to corner certain markets on views and all that. Like you mentioned how if someone would say that the war was provoked by NATO expansion in any way, that people just like have this emotional reaction to that. And it's because they were told so many times that it was unprovoked, that then they internalize that. And now you're telling them that they are wrong. Not that they were lied to a bunch of times by horrible liars, but that they are suckers because they believed it, because they're already that far into the consensus that now it's like a personal attack against them. So they get all emotional. Oh, no way. This couldn't possibly have anything to do with NATO expansion decisions that W. Bush made. Like some stupid college kid knows that it definitely doesn't have anything to do with that. Shut up. Yes, it does too. Right? But all they know is that like, I don't want to believe that because I've already identified myself with people who say things opposite than that. I've already identified myself with this is a clear black and white moral issue, and I'm on the side of good against the side of evil and aggression, and that makes me feel great. And so stop ruining my good time. Right? And so now it's like, Now it's not a debate over Ukraine. Now it's a debate over whose side are you on this campus? Who do you fit in with when it comes to different groups, going to different parties or smoking different strains of bud or whatever is the difference, listening to different bands. People who listen to this band think that it was provoked, and people who listen to that band don't think it was provoked, right? Like this, now we're not talking about Ukraine. Now we're talking about us. And who we are and which side we're on and how well we identify. And I would just encourage people to just come on, reflect a little bit on just like, you already know this. It doesn't really matter whether it's your guys in power or not. You know that people with power lie. They lie about everything. They have to, so that you'll let them get away with the things that they want to do with the power that they've got. There ain't no reason in the world to give them the benefit of the doubt. You don't have to. They lie about everything. You know, I was raised just right in the shadow of Vietnam, where you'd be a damn fool to believe things the government said. Nobody believed things the government said. Right? And like, I don't know, you kids are raised in the shadow of Iraq War II. I mean, imagine believing and internalizing the truth that Saddam Hussein is going to give nuclear weapons he doesn't have to his deadly enemies, Al-Qaeda, to attack the United States of America with if we don't launch an aggressive preemptive war to stop him first. I mean, talk about a load of crap, dude. Oh my God. Right? Like what? People really, man, they believed it. Oh, they believed it so bad. And oh, they hated you if you knew better than them about it too. Oh, you anti-American, commie, homo, pinko, hater, terrorist, lover. Just because you know that secular Saddam Hussein is terrified of Osama bin Laden and everything that he represents as the ultimate threat to his Ba'athist regime. The guy with the mustache and the guy with the beard, yeah, they're different dudes, y'all. They couldn't accept it, man. They couldn't. And now the liberals are in that same position. They've internalized this load of crap and they can't divorce themselves from it without having to admit how wrong they were. And if you remember after Iraq War II, there never really was any kind of comeuppance. The closest thing to a comeuppance the right being forced to reconcile with how bad they had been on the Middle East was when Donald Trump ran and they went ahead and voted for him after he attacked Jeb Bush for being George Bush's brother. And they went ahead and voted for Trump. That was as close as the American right. We're talking 150 million people, okay? That was close as they were ever able to come to say, I was wrong about that. Boy, was I a sucker. And boy, was I horrible to my son, my nephew, my brother-in-law, my next door neighbor who knew better than me. God, what an idiot I was. None of them said that. None of them said that. All they did was say, okay, well, I'll vote for Trump now. Hell, I never even supported that war very much, actually. Little green footballs? No, I didn't read and quote that crap every day. Nah. Same thing with the liberals here, dude. Look at this social psychological trap they've got themselves in. If they're wrong, then that means Donald Trump is right. God help us all, right? Now, is that any more sophisticated propaganda than before? I don't know. I'll tell you what, it does matter a lot that the national security state, well, I don't know, and I don't want to overstate this, but that whatever major Russiagate-ist faction of the national security state lost control of Twitter. I mean, the way Twitter was when it was under the rule of the womenists, right? Of like the Democrat, like center left liberals and all of them FBI agents and whatever. Like it was absolute hell on earth. And their promotion of every lie and shadow banning and blocking of everyone who was good on anything. I mean, man, that was a tyranny. God, it was horrible. And it's not perfect now, but it's so much less worse because you have this one guy who's rich and independent enough to stick his thumb in their eye. So thank God for that, at least, that we have Twitter to push back with. But yeah, I mean, look, the war party sure made the best of it, didn't they? Remember the NATO trolls where everybody became a little Shih Tzu dog or whatever it was? And
the Ghost of Kiev. The Ghost of Kiev story, they were promoting it all the time.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think I think I had a thing about this and I just cut it for space, but now I kind of want to add another sentence back about NATO, which is all these gigantic, big, fat, virgin, idiot, loser, incel Democrats being led around by the nose by Georgian and Polish and Ukrainian Nazis, real Nazis, Hitler-loving, Jew-hating, genocidal Nazis. And you got a bunch of liberal Democrats. Oh, you got to stand with Ukraine and trans rights and Black Lives Matter. And you idiots, you absolute idiots, being led around by, and like, this is a proven fact. I think the guys at the Gray Zone showed the leader of NATO is a Hitler-loving Nazi. I don't know how anyone in this country could be a Democrat. I would shoot myself in the face. I couldn't stand it, dude. I don't know how they do it. I would have such a splitting headache every day trying to reconcile all of these things that must be true together. I don't know how they do it. It's amazing.
Well, that's a really good segue into my final question I want to ask you. I called you about a week ago because I hosted a debate between Harrison Smith and Michael Tracy on who was worse on Israel, Donald Trump or Kamala. And, you know, you went in on Trump and you went in on Kamala. But at the end of the conversation, I told you, despite all of that, I'm still rooting for Trump because just how bad Kamala and the liberals are on the war in Ukraine. Yeah. And I'm wondering what you think of that. And I'm wondering what you think is going to happen on November 5th. This podcast is going to come out just a couple days before. Okay. So yeah, just take it away.
Well, I mean, look, I think Trump is basically an Israeli spy, right? He never was a Russian spy. He's an agent of the Likud. And the only thing about him is he's like kook enough and loose cannon enough that he could change his opinion about things sometimes, maybe. But his first term showed him to be nothing but the sock puppet of Jared Kushner, who is quite literally Benjamin Netanyahu's son-in-law. Okay? He's what the Israelis call a Sionim. He doesn't have to be an outright agent of Mossad. He's just loyal to Israel and its goals. He's a friend of Israel, and he's the son-in-law of the president. And Donald Trump doesn't know anything about it, doesn't care. You listen to him talk about the Golan Heights. He goes, I told him, give me 5 minutes on the Golan Heights. And they told him, well, Donald, we like the Golan Heights and we stole them and we want to keep them. And he said, great. He didn't ask, what's a Druze? And what did the Druze want? Because he doesn't know or give a damn the first thing about it. So he said, oh, yeah, the Syrians, Golan Heights, the Druze private property belongs to Israel now because I say so, because I'm the emperor of the world. That's who he is, okay? He never was a Russian agent. He's an Israeli agent. And quite frankly, like, I don't honestly, man, I've been writing this whole book about Russia for all this time. I'm way behind on this, but I basically look at this American election as a race between Mossad and Likud. And I think there are professionals in the intelligence and military services in Israel that are less religiously motivated and less crazy and would rather have stability for the long term. But I don't really think that they're in charge. I think they've basically sided with the Democrats here. And then Trump is nothing but Netanyahu's sock puppet. I'm sorry. It's just the truth, dude. Now I'm still rooting for him anyway, even though let me elaborate first. I'm genuinely terrified about what he's going to do to the Palestinians. I think that he could, there are other political constraints possibly, but I think it's possible, if not even likely, that he could tell Netanyahu to just finish cleansing all of Palestine, to just take all of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, build a railroad, force march them east into Jordan, force them into the Jordan River, into the Mediterranean Sea, into Egypt, into the Sinai Desert to burn and die, and just take it. Just kill him and take it. Why not?
Did you see his final deadline? He apparently, it was reported in the New York Post that he told Netanyahu he had to finish the war by the time he's president. And, it was always in vague terms. Like, what does that mean? Does it mean get the war over with, or does it mean? Well,
they're not going to be able to move 2 million people out of Gaza before then.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu, I don't know. And maybe Trump is rogue enough that he'll just get tired of getting pushed around and do what he wants. But I don't know. And I don't know whether the Israelis really got the stones to try to cleanse the West Bank now, but they're cleansing all of the northern part of the Gaza Strip as we speak. And I don't know whether they're going to ever let those people back again. I think they're probably not. And so they're already going so far here. And I just think that Donald Trump doesn't know or give a damn about it. When people say he's an anti-Semite, I mean, clearly he's a philo-Semite, but like, you know, I don't know if there's any part of him that is like, well, when it looks down on Jews, well, he's got to be even worse on Arabs then, right? It's not like he cares about the Palestinians, even if he has a grudge against Netanyahu for endorsing Biden or something. It's not like he's going to do right by the Palestinians. He has no incentive to do right by the Palestinians whatsoever. And so I'm really afraid of how bad it's going to get with him in there. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe like you say, like, you know, that he just told Netanyahu, look, man, you're going to have to figure it out, but I'm not going to preside over this level of war. So you better stop it right now, whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't really believe that though. I'll believe it when I see it. And then, yes, I'm still rooting for him. And I'm like on the edge. I go back and forth every day about whether I might even vote for the guy, only just due to my absolute seething, raging, center of the sun, hot hatred of the liberal Democrats right now. I hate them so much. I hate them, dude. I hate them so much. And not just for the Ukraine thing and the Gaza war, although both of those are a huge part of it, but just everything, dude. The way they ruined Star Wars, the way they ruined everything. I just want American center-left liberal women to cry. I want them to bankrupt their limp dick pussy little husbands on therapy bills. I want them to be as miserable as they have made the rest of the world. And you know what? They just lied to me again this morning. Just this morning. From yesterday with Tucker Carlson, Trump said, well, why don't we send Liz Cheney to the front and see how she likes getting shot at? And then you know what they did in the New York Times? First of all, she says, this is a death threat against me. And the New York Times goes, oh, Donald Trump threatens Liz Cheney with his ever increasingly violent rhetoric. What? He just said what every peace person says about the war hawks. Isn't it funny how fat Liz Cheney and Fred Kagan are and how they would never risk breaking a fingernail in defense of any policy that they support? Whether it's backing the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria or killing every last Iraqi or trying to get us into a damned war with Russia. Have you ever seen Fred Kagan? He looks like the cartoon of Homer Simpson. First you draw a round circle and then you draw a cylinder on top of it. This guy, he's fatter than my Uncle Jim. I love you, Uncle Jim. But man, he's the worst war hawk in America? We have to follow Fred Kagan into battle? No. Donald Trump says, Liz Cheney, boy, she sure does love violence, but I'd like to see her risk her own life for once. How about that? That's what all, anti-war people say about all chicken hawks, right? And then Liz Cheney, he threatened to kill me. You know what? You just lied to me again, and now I'm voting for him. I'm sorry. I just hate being lied to. And I admit it, it's my tiny, pathetic, fragile little ego. I can't take it. Because when you lie to me, what you're doing is you're telling me that I'm stupid and that I'm pathetic and that you think all you have to do is lie to me and then you can control my behavior by lying to me. You know what they told me about Tony Hinchcliffe? They said a man made anti-Puerto Rico remarks at a Trump rally at Madison Square Garden, which is the same place where the German-American Bund held the rally in 1939. Like, I'm sorry, you're a liar, and I think he just talked me into voting for the guy. And yes, I am the one who just said that he's an Israeli spy and will probably, kill another, finish the cleansing of Palestine. I mean, I don't know what he might do. He's nothing but Rudy Giuliani to me. He ain't Rand Paul. He sure as hell ain't Ron Paul. He's Donald Trump. He's a horror show. But instead of showing us a parade of contractors that he's ripped off over the last 40 years, which I bet you could line up from here to California, instead, they say that he threatened to murder Liz Cheney. They say that Tony Hinchcliffe is a man who made remarks. I hate them so much. Nobody has lied to me like this since they said that the terrorists in Syria were freedom fighters. Nobody's lied to me like this since they said Saddam Hussein was going to blow up my hometown if I didn't blow up his hometown first. And I just can't stand it, dude. I can't. Oh, and of course, Israel, Palestine, but just that's one entire lie from beginning to end. But I just cannot stand the way the Democrats lie every single day. They lie. And I just, dude, I don't know. I just hate them. I hate them like the hatred of the Dark Lord of the Sith. I mean, that is me, dude. I'm just consumed with loathing at this point. I want to, and really what it is it's their voters. It's the women who listen to national public radio and like it every day. I want them to cry and not stop crying for 4 years. The people who believed in Russiagate, not the people who told the Russiagate lies, the people who believed them. I want those people to bankrupt their husband with their psychotherapy bills. And their husbands deserve that too.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap it up. But thank you so much, Scott. This was really a privilege, and I can't wait to read your book. And once it, do you have a timeline? Do you know when you're going to be releasing it?
Right now, my plan is to read it one more time through while my guy is getting the page numbers and chapter headings and table of contents all set up here.
Cool.
And that's it. So that should be 2 weeks? I don't know. I got to do some final formatting. Everything takes longer than I think. So, but I absolutely am on the hardest deadline of the world of getting it out in time for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all this crap. So it's got to be done.
Well, we'll hope, like I said, hopefully we can get it out before World War III starts. And I really do believe that the Ukraine war is kind of just like, they're kind of sitting there waiting to see what happens with this election, to see whether Kamala or Trump are elected. I do believe Trump actually wants to end this war. And I hope your book has an influence in stopping it. So thank you so much. Why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff?
Sure. I'm at scotthorton.org. That's my show. I've done 6,000 something interviews there, and you can find all my books there. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org. And man, I got a great bunch of libertarians writing articles and doing podcasts over there that I'm like, I wish I had enough time to just devote all my attention to just promoting everybody else at the Institute. It's really something else. And there's going to be more of that in the coming year. And also, of course, antiwar.com. I'm the editorial director there. And I'm on the radio in Los Angeles on Thursday afternoons on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. And the new book, it's Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. And it should be available here real soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for tuning into the Liam McCollum Show, a podcast by Human Reaction. Check out the Human Reaction weekly podcast hosted by Joe Sheehan, David Rand, and Kyle Mack. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to both of our channels.